Robert Bigelow came to terms with the Shermans within a matter of weeks, and the sale of Skinwalker Ranch was finalized in September of 1996. But that didn't happen before the mysterious forces left a final parting gift to the Shermans, and this time, the manifestation was more personal than ever. Terry Sherman later claimed that after one of their last nights sleeping at the ranch, both he and his wife woke up with the telltale sign of alien abduction, a scoop mark scar mysteriously appearing on one's body. The day before this incident, they had spent the whole day taking care of their cattle and preparing their ranch for the impending handover to Bigelow. When the weary couple went inside for the night, they made sure they shut their house up tight, locking all the doors and even the windows. After a long, hot shower to wash away the grime of the day, they went to bed early. They woke up the next morning to see their bed sheets soaked in blood. As they were wriggling out of these inexplicably bloody sheets, they noticed that they both had matching scoop marks on their right thumbs.
Needless to say, the Shermans were relieved to finally be leaving the ranch. They took the money from the sale and used it to purchase another ranch, some 20 miles away. But as grateful as they were for their escape from Skinwalker Ranch, there was a part of Terry that just couldn't let the ranch go completely. You can chalk it up to his rancher's pride, but Terry couldn't quite stomach the idea of letting the mysterious phenomena win. Even after moving out, he still wanted to get to the bottom of what was happening. And so Terry signed on with NZDT to become an extra ranch hand and assist in the investigations being carried out by the team of researchers. The arrangement was just as appealing to Bigelow, who knew that no one knew the grounds better than Terry and considered him an invaluable resource. One of Terry's first major tasks as Skinwalker Ranch guide for NZDT was looking into a recent spate of cattle mutilations. Such things were not exactly unusual in the region. Cattle mutilations had been reported in and around Skinwalker Ranch ever since the 1960s.
The Shermans' first possible encounter with the phenomenon had occurred in April of 1995. The ranch had just endured several days of heavy rain, and Terry and his son were attempting to gather their cattle on the slippery range. While they were trying to retrieve a wayward calf, they spotted a cow struggling to pull herself up a steep incline, but miserably failing due to the slick mud that covered the field. Terry decided to take care of the cow after they caught the calf. But when the Shermans returned to the cow just minutes later, they found it lying down at the bottom of the ridge, completely lifeless. They initially surmised that it had drowned in the flatwaters, but upon closer inspection they could see that the animal had been mutilated in every sense of the word. Its anus, genitals, and tongue had all been sliced out as if with a swords scalpel. The poor beast had also been completely drained of blood. Several more mysteriously mutilated cattle were found after the NZDT takeover, and the mutilations invariably occurred when no one was looking. In one instance, 2 mutilated animals were discovered at approximately the same time within several feet of each other, with their carcasses shoved up under a fence.
Terry scoured the vicinity and helped to secure the perimeter, but nothing was found. Security cameras were then installed throughout the area, and an observation trailer was set up from which trained scientists could observe anything that transpired on the ranch. But inexplicably, they had seen nothing when on January the 21st, 1997, Terry discovered young cows near the observation center with strange wounds to their eyes and ears. The injuries seemed to have occurred during a bad snowstorm the night before. Had the entities behind the injuries taken advantage of the near whiteout conditions to cut into these animals? And if so, why hadn't they finished the job? Had someone on the research staff gotten too close and sent them fleeing? At any rate, the heavy snowfall meant that there were no footprints to be found. Unable to find a trail leading to the culprits, Terry summoned local veterinarians to take a look at the affected cattle. The first vet took one look at the injuries and declared that they were unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. But the next veterinarian, a more experienced man, strenuously disagreed. He insisted that the wounds had been made by a coyote or a wildcat. The idea of a big cat randomly attacking cattle during a snowstorm struck the NIDS team as unlikely, but such theories from veterinarians and other local professionals were quite common. Often enough, when they were confronted with the phenomenon of cattle mutilations, they would simply try to explain it away, even if the explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Whatever their origin, the mutilations only increased after this point. In one particularly harrowing incident, one of Terry's own calves, which he had recently transferred back to Skinwalker Ranch, was viciously mutilated in broad daylight while Terry and other researchers were standing within arm's reach. Terry was anguished at the sight, but the research team didn't have time for sympathy. They got busy studying the carcass, then conducted an autopsy to find out how the animal had met its end. The calf's body appeared to have been torn open by some tremendous energy. One leg had been ripped off right at the joint as easily as someone would pull the leg off of a cooked rotisserie chicken. No known predator of the animal world would have been able to do such a thing with the leg of a living, struggling cow. Besides this dismemberment, the calf had the typical hallmarks of cattle mutilation. All its internal organs had been removed with laser precision, it was completely drained of blood, and one ear was neatly severed from the head. There was no obvious ripping or tearing at the incision, and when the wound was placed under a microscope it was irrefutably clear that the ear had been cut off with a precision instrument. Bigelow's NIDS had a real and active predator of the paranormal kind.
After living on Skinwalker Ranch for a while, the Sherman family had begun to notice discernible patterns in the paranormal activity that confronted them. And the biggest canvas for these telltale signs was always the skies above their heads. In particular, a piece of sky right over a wooded grove hosted a very specific retinue of spooky happenings. Almost every evening, like clockwork, right when the sun was going down, an odd-looking orange smudge would appear just above the treetops. At first the family rationalized this aerial phenomenon as merely an odd manifestation of the refraction of setting sunlight as it passed over the clouds. But as this phenomenon repeated itself without alteration night after night, Terry's curiosity was piqued enough to investigate further. Setting his night vision-equipped rifle on a tree stump, he used the weapon's scope to zoom in on the orange smudge suspended over the trees. Strangely, as he looked more closely at the group of orange clouds, he could almost look through them to what appeared to be another sky. He seemed to be looking down a tunnel that opened up outside the very fabric of space and time. Was he viewing a doorway to another dimension? Was this tunnel, spanning from one world to another, where the strange vehicles, creatures, and other entities were arriving from?
Just a few days later, Terry witnessed what appeared to be a verification of this theory. As he stared through his rifle's scope once more, he saw a large, black, triangle-shaped craft fly out of the putative interdimensional doorway. This doorway was apparently paper-thin around the edges and could only be seen when looked at straight on. This meant that anyone driving along the roadways near the property would not be able to see it, but it could be clearly observed from within the ranch. Is the Skinwalker Ranch home to naturally, or even unnaturally, occurring doorways into another dimension? Are advanced aircraft, otherwise known as unidentified flying objects, routinely entering our world through these interdimensional portals? If so, the craft weren't the only things shimmying through these galactic gateways. Later witnesses have even seen humanoid creatures stepping out of these open doorways into our dimension. In August of 1997, the NIDS crew witnessed something highly unusual even by the standards of Skinwalker Ranch. It was 3 a.m, and 2 scientists named Mike and Jim had been manning an observation post for several hours when they saw an unknown light shining in the distant darkness. Well aware that something unusual was occurring in front of them, the men set up a camera on a tripod to capture the incident. As the camera automatically snapped pictures every 30 seconds, Mike peered out at the anomaly through a pair of night vision binoculars.
All the while, the orb was purposefully leading the pursuing pack into the thick tree cover to the south, as if it wanted the game to continue away from Tara's wearied eyes. Sure enough, the orb suddenly dropped to the ground, tantalizingly within reach of the chasing dogs, and sped off into the woods. All three dogs followed in hot pursuit. Tara's beloved pets had left his side for the last time, as mere moments later he heard what could only be their death wails, 3 howls of brief but intense pain. Terry stared hard and horrified at the entrance to the woods, but he could not hear or see anything more. The entire ranch was now gripped in a deathly quiet. Terry sat in his lawn chair for the better part of 2 hours as the darkness grew around him, hoping beyond hope to see his dogs come running back. And as brave as Terry had proved himself to be in his encounter with the bulletproof wolf, he didn't dare step into those dark woods where the hovering menace still lurked. Eventually he quietly packed up his things and went in for the night.
But as strange as it sounds, Skinwalker Ranch may not be the only location where these interdimensional doorways occur. Just take for example a case that came to light in January of 2014, in which a Wisconsin rancher named Leroy Smith reportedly witnessed a very similar phenomenon. The winter was particularly bad in Wisconsin that year, with a frigid blast of Arctic air perpetually blanketing much of the rancher's property in ice and snow. Leroy says that the strange happenings usually occurred when the snowstorms were at their worst. Much like Terry Sherman's experience on Skinwalker Ranch, the phenomenon would begin with an orange vortex-like structure appearing over the horizon, just above the treetops. This structure was only visible from one direction, that is, it could only be seen when looking at it head-on. From the sides, this bizarre tunnel of light was so thin it was almost two-dimensional. Head-on, however, the old rancher could stare in amazement as the tunnel opened up in the middle of the sky and creatures dropped out of it. Yes, that's right. This Wisconsin rancher saw big, hairy creatures descend from the spinning sky vortex. He also saw creatures much more akin to the traditional skinwalker, dog-like animals that would jump from the opening, hit the ground and then take off running on 2 legs. Although Wisconsin is admittedly a bit removed from the traditional source of skinwalker lore in the southwestern United States, the bipedal dogs Leroy describes have an undeniable similarity to the shape-shifting dogmen of Navajo legend.
One interesting difference between the sightings that occurred on Leroy Smith's ranch in Wisconsin and those at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah is that whatever dropped out of the Wisconsin portals left footprints behind. The fresh footprints in the snow looked exactly as if they had been made by an ordinary flesh and blood being, but strangely enough, they would begin out of nowhere. It was as if whatever made them had just dropped out of the sky exactly as Leroy describes. Attempts to track this creature were fruitless, however, as the trail of the beast would disappear just as suddenly as it had begun. Before NZDT was shut down in 2007, the team had one more encounter with a portal on Skinwalker Ranch, but rather than seeing something drop out of it, this time they witnessed a strange Bigfoot-like creature jump into a portal. On this occasion, the researchers and ranch hands were in hot pursuit of a strange, hairy, bipedal creature.